Good morning and welcome to our latest presentation from Angel to Exit, the due diligence overview. Today we're going to be talking about what due diligence is, how it works, why it exists, and so forth. An investor has to be convinced at the end of the day to make the investment. So the reason people invest is to balance risk with reward. So they're trying to get more reward for less risk, and that means the more they understand, the more clarity they have around the risks that really exist and the potential rewards that are there. So in order to invest, I personally need to believe it's a reasonable reward for the risk. I need to have clarity around what those risks are, clarity around what those rewards are, and I need to believe this valuation I have of risk and reward, however I do that, to the level of the investment. So if I'm investing a teeny bit of money, that's not as big a deal as a larger chunk of money. So in order to be credible, I can't just have my belief based on what you say. You could say, we're going to make you $10 million tomorrow if you put in $10 today, and I'm not going to believe it. Even if it were true, I still wouldn't believe it. But I might believe it if you had the information to convince me, and if I read through it, thought through it, and believed it was reasonable. So I need some level of independent verification besides what you say. And so there are a couple of things that happen. One of them is people tend to believe what other people believe if they believe in those people. It's a transitive trust property. Investors tend to trust and follow what other investors do. So when you go into due diligence, some companies say, well, what am I going to have to tell them? And the answer is everything they ask for. Basically, if you want my money, you'll answer my questions. And if you don't answer my questions, I'm less likely to give you my money. If you say, oh, I can't tell you that, it's a secret, or if you say you have to sign a non-disclosure, I'm likely to say no. Your inability or your hesitancy in answering any of my questions leads to my hesitancy in believing the answers, but also in believing that you know what you're doing and that you're being honest with me and that you've thought the business through. Generally, I'm not going to be asking you questions that somebody who's a sound business person has never thought through before. But if I do, saying, gee, I haven't thought of that, is probably a pretty good answer. NDAs, they're usually ignored and they're usually not signed. If they are signed, they better be pretty limited, because any, investor, you're asking him for money, and now he has to sign something that says he can't use the information you provide him in making his decisions except with respect to your business, and he can't tell anybody else why he did this or answer anybody else's questions. That's pretty onerous for somebody you're asking money from. Here are some minimums, right? That is, if you don't provide this information, any sort of sensible investor should walk away from you. They need to know about the people, the company, the contracts, the customers, the suppliers, how, what's the deal, the capitalization tables as previous investors, and how they've invested, what kind of instruments they've had, what kind of deals they've gotten, financial projections and the basis. Where do you think this is going to go, and why do you think it's going to go there? And then they're going to start to get into things like why other businesses can't come in and just take it over. It's barriers to entry, your market position, any advantages you have. What's your strategy for getting this thing to market? What's the size of the market, the total addressable market? What's the marketing mix? Is this, what is it? Where do you put it in the market? How do you get it to the market? How are people going to find it and buy it and deal with it? Investment instruments. This is the particulars of the contract for investment and exit opportunities and times. Remember, people invest in order to get their money back, which means they get their money back when you exit. That's when you sell the business or go public, and when that's likely to happen. And then they're going to want to talk to people. They want to do interviews, look at the actual documents, do independent verification. If you say I'm a corporation in Delaware, they're going to go look at the Delaware corporate site and see whether you're registered in Delaware according to the Delaware government. This is what I look at sort of as a non-starter if you don't answer these questions if I don't understand them. So the first thing I say is who sells what to whom and how do they fulfill what they sell? So who sells it? How do they sell it? And once they sell it, how does the customer get what they bought? What does it cost? How much do you make on it? How's the cash flow going to work? When are you going to run out of money? How much money are you going to need to turn this into profitable? When is it going to break even? How big? How soon? Realistically, can you get to 1 million customers in 3 days? I don't care who you are. I think the answer is no. It's not that it's never happened. It's that it's very unlikely to happen. So realistically is important. How much money for how much equity? If I'm giving you, $25,000 for 1% of your company, you're saying that the company's worth $2.5 million. And so I have to, believe that that's a rational valuation. How do I get my money out and when? And there are, different arrangements for getting your money out. You can get repaid, you can get, dividends, you can get repaid with interest and convertible into equity. You can just buy equity directly. You can have debt. There's all sorts of issues with this associated with taxes, for example, and so forth. And then, how can I leverage what or who that I have or know to help you win? So angel investment is not just about I give you my money and you give me more money later. It's also about how can I help you? See, if you have a startup and it's in an area I know nothing about, then it better be an awfully good investment, with a lot of certainty around it, or I don't want to go in. But if it's something that I know something about, or I have good connections in that field, if I know the perfect channel partner for you, then I can leverage that channel partner that I know, that who or that what that I have or know to help you win. And that means it's a better investment for me because I can help you win, and I can also watch what's going on with that channel partner. Okay, this is the process of due diligence and what you should expect. First of all, it's an incremental process. It takes typically 60 to 90 days. It's faster if you're more responsive, if you already have the information there. It's much slower if that's not true. What will happen in about 90 days is people will just stop. They'll say, look, you're just not ready. We can't do due diligence on you because you can't answer our questions. You're not ready. And then, of course, once I learn more, as you start to answer my questions, I start to have more questions to a point. There comes a point when I've asked enough to be able to make my evaluation, and I'm not going to drill down any further. And then typically, but not always, a written document's produced. So who writes it has everything to do with how credible it is. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. It's typically a fairly comprehensive approach. It's not as detailed as a full audit would be of everything. That is, you're not going to have somebody coming and looking at every transaction you undertake unless you only take a very small number of transactions. Typically, we want to understand more than what the CEO would have to tell us. And in fact, often in doing this process, the CEO learns a lot and the company pivots. So, when this happens, if we find something in due diligence, and we very often do, that's a problem, the CEOs very often adapt, and their ability to listen and understand and learn from that process and adapt is part of how we evaluate the CEO. So you very often have companies that have 2 or 3 critical problems because they haven't done this before, and the people doing the evaluation, the people doing the due diligence may actually know more about some things than the CEO or the people in the company. But when that CEO adapts and takes a new, better direction, improves their business plan based on that, that gives the investors a lot of confidence that that CEO is going to listen, because angel investors are going to be involved in the process along the way. They're not just going to sit back and ignore you. They may ask all, that is, every single one of your references. A good due diligence process will ask almost or all of them. So we're going to want to know who claims that you know what you're doing, and not just personal references. The references include some people that have bought things from you and sold things to you and worked with you and so forth. And they just want to have conversations with these people and find out, get a sense of you and your company and the people in your company, and whether what they claim is truth and so forth. And they may also engage specialized experts. So a good due diligence team typically includes a lawyer, usually somebody that's familiar with startups, and an intellectual property lawyer, unless there's some, if it's a real estate investment, they'll want a real estate lawyer. A subject matter expert. They're going to want somebody, if you're in the wine business, they're going to want a wine expert on their team. Financial expert, somebody that can look at the books, look at how you plan things out, do the cash flow analysis, make sure everything makes financial sense, and give an opinion on the reasonability of that, but also on whether you're going to be GAAP compliant in your accounting, and whether you are using double entry bookkeeping, and whether you're sloppy or keeping track of things. And then usually there's a business person who very often is also the team lead. And when I say a business person, this is just somebody who's led, evaluated, worked with many businesses, so they've just seen this movie before. So they'll say, have you thought about doing this instead of that? Because they know that other companies they've seen that did this instead of that did better, and there's reasons why. And maybe the answer is no, and maybe there's a good reason for that, but that's what you want, somebody with that expertise that can evaluate it. And then, of course, angel groups tend to be more thorough than individuals because they have more time. That is, there are more people involved in the groups. If you have a group that has 6 members, they may invest in 2 or 3 businesses a year and do due diligence with their 6 members participating, but they're not going to have the same depth and breadth of reach and expertise and financial understanding and connections that you'll have in a larger group. So the larger group will tend to do a more thorough job, a more in-depth job, but typically only a few of the members in any such organization will be involved. They tend to work in teams of 4, sometimes more, could be 6, 7, or 8, and then a lot of people might read it and comment or ask questions, but they're not really deeply involved in that process. Finally, there's the question of whether you should do a due diligence for money, or buy a due diligence, or have it done by a group, or what. So the purest approach to due diligence is that it be purely independent of the company, paid for by the investors or done by volunteers who are going to invest, made up of investors interested in investing but who have not yet invested. And this is so that it's completely free of any potential that somebody doing the diligence could benefit from a more positive outcome. So it's about independence. It has some fundamental limitations. One of them is time versus investment levels. If you're looking at putting $1 million into something, then you probably will spend the time necessary to do an in-depth due diligence on that $1 million decision, unless you're a multi-billionaire and don't care about $1 million. But you have the investment level to justify the time it takes to make the decision. Somebody that get paid $500 an hour and is 1/5 of the time going to invest in a company for $25,000, well, 500 times 10 is $5,000. So if they spend 10 hours on each due diligence, then it costs them as much in terms of time to do the diligence process as the total investment that they're making. So it essentially cuts the value of their investment in half. So, the amount of time versus the investment level is sort of critical on an amateur, independent basis. How much time will I spend to be certain about how much investment is the question. And now it turns out few companies will get through the in-depth process. And that's another problem with this purist version of due diligence, because people aren't getting paid. They'll spend 10, 12, however many hours, but at some point, if the company's not providing them the information they ask right away and making it easy on them and coordinating the activities, then the people on the due diligence team, they'll say, look, nobody's paying me for this. I'm trying to find out if you're worth investing in. You won't talk to me, or I can't get the answers right away. They'll walk away. So if all the DD team members don't invest, there's another issue. It becomes a problem for the company because all these due diligence team members who look at the company, if they decided not to invest and they were serious about thinking about investing, well, gosh, you were serious about it, you were thinking about it, you did the due diligence, and you decided not to invest. Well, why is that? Right? Oops. So that's not so good. But on the other hand, in the purest due diligence, those who succeed are likely, pretty darn good bets. I mean, they're better bets just on the basis of the fact that the people that were looking at it completely independently took the time, took the effort. These are other angel investors like me, and they thought it was worthwhile not just to undertake the effort, but at the end of the day, they undertook the effort and invested. So that's, there's a big win if that's right, if the company can sustain that, and if the interest is there and the investment comes, that's great. The professional approach is different. It's a paid team. So because they're paid, they almost always complete the due diligence process. Also though, the fact that they're paid by the company means they're not independent, period. So you can't claim you're independent or act like you're independent if you're paid by the company. And now a lot of people say this is not what they call due diligence. It's not diligent if it's not independent. Now, my view of this is somewhere in the middle. I think prepaid helps. And so when I do due diligence for companies on a professional basis, they pay me up front in equity. If they pay me cash, that's great. I'll take cash for it. But it's a professional activity one way or the other, right? If you pay me, $25,000 to review your company for cybersecurity, I'm going to do a cybersecurity review, and I'm not going to favor your company. I'm going to give you an honest review because that's what I do for my profession. If you pay me to head a due diligence team, then you've paid me. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to give you a truthful report because it's a professional activity. That's what I do for a living. I do that professionally. It's not an amateur activity. So I'm going to do my best to get at the truth. But if you pay me afterwards based on performance, or if I get paid only if other people invest, well, that's another matter, right? Then clearly, it's almost impossible for me to avoid the value of what I have being tied to the output. And this is also a problem in, I've done, as I mentioned, cybersecurity reviews for companies for many years. And very often, the people asking you to do the review ask you to change the report to be more favorable or say things a little bit more nicely. And I generally say no, but lots of people say yes. So that's what it is to not be independent, is when you allow yourself to be swayed, not by facts. Facts are always valuable to sway you, but because somebody says, I want a better report, or there's a lot more business here if I get a good report, or something like that. And by the way, I've had offers, something like that. I've been on a due diligence team where the company said, gee, if we have a good due diligence, we'd like to hire you to work with us in the future. To which my response was to put that in the report. And that was a big negative from my perspective. That's called, I don't hesitate to use the term bribery, but it's not a bribe because I didn't accept it. It's attempted. Equity interest hurts credibility, right? That is because I gain if you find it. If they paid me cash up front, that would be better in terms of credibility than equity because I've been paid, they paid me in cash. That's it. If they pay you afterwards based on the output, that's different. It changes that dynamic. It helps credibility if the due diligence team invests in addition to their payment. But only after the due diligence process is complete. So if I'm doing a professional due diligence and I've been paid in equity in advance, I go through the due diligence, and then afterwards I also decide to invest. That says something else. That says I did my professional due diligence, and afterwards I put my own money in, independent of the company. So that's a little bit of a step up. Now, just saying that members of the Angel Capital Association do not accept professional due diligence as due diligence. It is not what they call due diligence. To other investors, due diligence reports are or should be treated as caveat emptor. That is, let the buyer beware. Every due diligence report should openly and clearly state every interest that the due diligence team members have in the company: equity, warrants, promises, previous relationships, my best friend from high school, whatever it is. You need to disclose that, and if you don't disclose that, then that starts to move towards fraud, or at least potential for fraud. Now, most all these reports have lots of things that say, they're disclaimers and such. So you might not be able to actually sue them for fraud. But you should be wary if you're looking at these reports, and if you're having these reports written, you should be careful not to say these sorts of things. You need to disclose. That's fundamental to eliminating conflicts of interest. Obviously, any other relationship, supplier, channel, father, brother, what have you. A professional due diligence report should openly and clearly state that it's a professional due diligence report, not buried somewhere in the report, but right up front, and wherever, and what each team member is paid, how they're paid, when they're paid, and by whom they're paid. It may not be the amount, but it'd be, team members were paid in equity prior to starting the due diligence process by the company. And for each individual member, I tend to require this in the report. And sometimes there's a mix of different payment methodologies for different due diligence team members. And so those will be different, and you should read those if you're looking at such a report. However, sometimes due diligence reports do not clearly indicate this, or they bury it. And my view is anything that's not very direct and very obvious, that's deception. That's how I view it as a potential investor, and I run away from those investments. I just don't even consider them for a variety of reasons. So be warned that you need to be clear. The ideal final report is comprehensive, well-written, and clear on the situation, whatever that situation is. Done by accredited investors, that is, people that are accredited to invest and prior to any investment that they make. Well-researched, factually accurate in every way. It doesn't push the investor, it informs them. It doesn't suggest you should do this. It doesn't say it's a good investment. That's not what it should say. It should say, here, the returns are reasonably calculated based on the facts made available, something like that. So, but not, this is a great investment, you should put your money in. It should look good, be easy to read, and easy to find things. Now, I'm going to talk about real due diligence reports, which rarely, if ever, make that level of quality. Angel investors tire of doing these efforts for free. Some investors walk away. Early investors may help in the due diligence report for later investors. The due diligence lead may not lead it very well. The companies push for good results to gain investors, and they help the team format and summarize. So what you get then is sort of a mix of a report written by the company with some things written by the independent people and other things not written by them. And it can be confusing and difficult to understand from the standpoint of the reader. And also, of course, just as you read through the presentation, having to shift your mindset and point of view on what you're reading makes it more difficult to justify saying, I'm going to believe what it says. Of course, it's up to the company. At the end of the day, it's likely to be required by investor, and the company has to make it happen to get investments. So if the company does nothing, they won't get any investment. So they have to be involved in it one way or the other. If the angel investors aren't deeply involved in the due diligence process, it probably won't work very well. The company will just have a beautiful document that they wrote, but people like me will shun it. If the angels aren't assisted, on the other hand, few reports or fundings actually happen. So there is a collaboration necessary. There are sort of three approaches that work well based on my experience and the experience I've heard from others. Angel groups sometimes fund support personnel to foster the due diligence. This is rare and hard to do well, but when it is done well, it's extremely helpful. That is, somebody will put the document together, and the independent, members of the group, the investors, the accredited investors, they'll do their little chunk of work and report on it. And so that makes it work more smoothly and gets more due diligence reports done. And they look fine, and the company isn't the one that wrote it or formatted it. And the second one that works is companies are extremely well prepared and helpful. And that's the best thing, right? It's necessary unless a professional due diligence team is used for most cases to get a due diligence report done. Usually, it's only the case for entrepreneurs who've done this before. So what happens is, after you've gone through this process for 2 or 3 companies, and you have a couple of successful exits, well, of course, you're a much stronger CEO, and investors are more likely to invest because you're a better jockey. But also, you know what it takes and you're prepared. You have all the information ready, so when the due diligence team comes to do it, you have the answers to all their questions sitting there, and you're happy to answer the questions and get them in touch with the people that they want to interview. And it doesn't take very long, and it's not hard to do, and it's simple, and it's straightforward. So you know, it takes time, of course, of the entrepreneur to prepare properly, unless in their process they're always prepared. And that's not a bad idea, right? That is to have all that information on what you're doing and how you're doing it prepared. It shows that you know how to run a business and you're tracking what you're doing. And the third thing that works is professional due diligence teams paid in advance. And that's, you know, I participate in that second kind, and I participate in that third kind. And I've been part of one of the first kind, and they work well. So I want to thank you, and I hope you enjoyed yet another session of Angel to Exit.